Hello, I'm Jake Stone,
I'm Jesse Owens.
and we welcome you to another episode of Generally Particular, a production of the London Lyceum. Generally Particular is a show dedicated to discussing and reflecting on the whole Baptist story. We are a show by Baptists, about Baptists, and for Baptists, as well as Presbyterians, Lutherans, Anglicans, and even Methodists. Jesse is an Arminian Baptist, and I am a Calvinist Baptist. In the 17th and 18th centuries, we would have been known as a general Baptist and a particular Baptist. And so we brought those things together to form what we think is a fun show to talk about Baptist history, hence, generally particular. Jesse, believe it or not, we are just 2 months away from Christmas.
Wow.
And 1 month away from Thanksgiving.
I'm looking forward to that.
We are recording this here at the end of October, and I'm just wondering, where has the time went this year? But it reminds me of the old saying that once college football season begins, it just the rest of the year goes by fast. I mean, from Labor Day to the end of the year, it moves fast. As Alabama fans, the season is not moving fast enough for us these days. But, you know, I had somebody rebuke me and say, you've lost 2 games this year. I mean, come on. But you know what? I have moved on to basketball. November 4th is when the basketball season starts, and Alabama is the preseason ranked number 2 team.
Man,
I'm already looking for flights and hotels in San Antonio for the Final Four.
Wow.
I've never seen the Alamo, and so it'd be a great trip.
Oh, yeah. That was, so ETS was in San Antonio a couple of years ago. Was that last year? A couple of years
I think that was last year.
Yeah, so that was the first time I had seen the Alamo. Yeah. It's great. It's right in the middle of downtown, kind of. It's very interesting.
Well, that's Davy Crockett, Tennessee, the Volunteers.
I'm glad we could help. Well, we don't want to say too much about the Volunteers. I'd like to make a few observations, though, about what you've said here, Jake. One, you've jumped straight to Thanksgiving and Christmas. You forgot we have an election coming up. But I'm sure you don't have anything you want to say about that. The other observation that I would make about what you've said is that you kind of sound like an Auburn fan. We're halfway through the football season and you're already having to jump to the basketball season. It's not encouraging.
Very offensive. And I mean, to call me an Auburn fan would be the equivalent of me just saying that because you're an Arminian, you're really a Pelagian, which means you're probably a Jesuit.
We've got to work on your limited repertoire here, but it is kind of like Auburn fans have been. They always have to move on to basketball, and I suppose that's what they're doing this year. Probably watching Bruce Pearl clips and getting excited about.
Bruce Pearl has gotten very political too. He posts more about Trump than he does his own team on social media.
Really?
Yeah, and I think he's wanting to follow the Tommy Tuberville. Nick Saban started beating Tommy Tuberville, so Tommy Tuberville had to leave Auburn.
He had to get into politics.
Nate Oates is beating Bruce Pearl and taking over, so it's kind of that trajectory, I think.
I saw a video the other day of Bruce Pearl shaking hands with Nate Oates, and from all I could tell, it seemed like Bruce Pearl made the handshake a lot longer than he had to, and it was kind of like he was trying to pull Oates in, like he was asserting his masculinity or authority or something. So that was kind of entertaining.
That's what Jesse tries to do when we meet each other. He tries to shake my hand like that.
I really try to shake your hand real hard. Yeah,
pull me in. It
dominate. Let you know who's in charge. Yeah.
Yeah, I just say, bro, I have my hair, so don't try that with me.
Oh man, and such a sensitive subject.
So, hey, you've already smeared me today. So, I mean,
the Auburn thing really got you riled up here.
Yeah, I mean, I can take it, but I'm gonna dish it back too. And
come out guns a-blazing here.
Dr. Wilsey has trained me well in his classes. So for people who don't know, so John D. Wilsey, professor at Southern, great. He
needs to make an appearance on this show. I mean, I don't know if he wants to talk about.
We'd have to talk about Baptist history, and he doesn't really like Baptist history. He told me.
Yeah.
So that's why I want to do my PhD under him. So anyway, but he is a huge Georgia fan, huge Georgia Bulldog fan. Now I've never heard him bark at me, thankfully, but I wouldn't put it past him. But the first class that I ever got to sit in with him for was after Georgia had beaten Alabama in the national championship game. And so I had to hear that in class. And it got so bad one time that I had to threaten him with my grandma. And I said, now, look, if you're going to keep on dishonoring our program, don't make me have Bobby Jean call you, because she will. And so, but then, we've beaten them a couple of times since then. I was very nice when we beat them in the SEC championship game. I gave him a whole day before I texted him. And then I didn't say it. Now, let me say, so Alabama beat Georgia somehow a few weeks ago. We're still not sure how that happened.
Still can't figure that out.
I've wondered if that was an alternative universe that we were living in. And so I was, not going to say anything that Sunday. I was going to wait to go by his office during the week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday passes. Never see his truck on campus. It's fall break. I thought, well, surely at least, he's going to come into the office one day. And I always, during my work shift, I take a walk around the campus for a break to stretch my legs and all, and didn't see him. Well, of course, the next Saturday after the Georgia win was when we lost to Vanderbilt. And so that Sunday evening at Kenwood in Louisville, they were going to do a thing on conservatism, politics, and the church and state with Jonathan Lehman and Dr. Wilsey. So I told a buddy of mine that we went together to the event, and I said, and he knows Dr. Wilsey well. He's seen it all with Dr. Wilsey, and he said, I told him, I said, over or under 5 seconds, as soon as he sees me, he's going to say something about that Vanderbilt game. And my buddy Jonathan said under, going under 5 seconds. So we're out there in the lobby, door opens, he's talking to somebody, and he sees me like that. Anchor down.
Yeah.
And
you know what he was doing? He was trying to beat you to the punch. He was trying to avoid.
Oh, he come over there and he hugged me and he said, I know this is hard. He said, he gave me fake sympathy. So anyway, yes, it is the time of sackcloth and ashes in these days.
It is. Hey, you know what else is about a month away? A little, I guess, less than a month away, and that is the annual meeting of the Evangelical Theological Society out in San Diego. And Lord willing, we're both going to be there. And we're thinking about taking Generally Particular on the road. I don't know if that's going to be us sitting at the London Lyceum Hanover Press booth and recording an episode there, or if it's going to be Jake walking around with a microphone asking people questions, or what that's going to be.
I'm going to be passing out tracts.
Maybe.
Tracts.
Yeah. We've actually created some Generally Particular tracts for the Presbyterians at ETS. But maybe people can comment and tell us what we should do at ETS for Generally Particular. Maybe
I'm really excited. It's might be my first time to be in San Diego, to be in California, to be on the West Coast. Jesse and I are actually flying together. Of course, Jesse's sitting in first class. I'm back there in coach with the normal people.
I don't think Southwest has first class.
I thought that well, that's right. We are flying on the same plane. Originally, you were going to go on your own jet that the college provides for you there. So.
That's Jordan's private jet.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's coming out of Raleigh there. So I'm excited about that. It's kind of interesting to think about that when we are there, we will know what happened in the election. I guess this will probably be if we record in 2 weeks. I don't think they'll have called the race yet. I will be shocked if it's not until the weekend before it's officially declared who wins. But I told Jesse this earlier. Look, since the year 2000, I have always really been into this. I mean, keeping up. I mean, I still follow the news and everything. it's probably the most detached I've ever been from an election, though,
Mm.
because I think on one hand, I think like most people, I'm ready for it to be over. Second of all, I think either outcome, there's going to be some bad ramifications, and I just stop there. I'm not going to go into my full insights, but I do hope and pray that there will be a semblance of peaceful transition, whatever happens, and really that we see a miracle take place, and that governance will happen in our country. I mean, I think it should bother all of us as American citizens that we live in such a dysfunctional country. I'm not one of those. This is the worst it's ever been, because there's been very much bad periods and all that, but the lack of any cohesion, where we don't pass budgets, we don't tackle big problems, we don't do anything but have podcasts, TikTok, go on cable news, raise money. I mean, that's all these people do, is raise money nonstop. And I mean, we have a exploding debt. Nobody talks about that. We have programs that are going to expire. Nobody talks about that. We have an educational system that's not very good. Nobody talks about that. The world is probably in World War III right now. I mean, we now confirm that North Korea does have troops in Russia, in Ukraine, and it's just frivolous stuff.
Yeah.
That we're at. So
Yeah, beyond all the moral decline and decay,
yeah,
we have all of the financial insanity, where we just spend and spend and spend, and no one has the courage to balance a budget or to cut spending or do anything else. I don't know. Maybe it's the 17th Amendment's fault, but there's a serious problem there. So
I thought it was the 19th Amendment. Oh, that's another show. So anyway, I am depressed now. So Jesse, we can thank Jesse, since he wanted to talk.
I'm having a good time. I was enjoying myself.
I just listed everything that's wrong with our society.
Well, I already know all those things. I was just enjoying the conversation. Yeah.
Jesse listens to talk radio nonstop. That's what he falls asleep to at night.
Local talk radio. Unfortunately, it's the local NPR station, so that is kind
of well, we can guess where they're broadcasting from.
Yeah.
And it's not Moscow, Idaho, but Moscow, Russia, probably.
Yeah.
So, with that,
coming to you live from the campus of Vanderbilt University, Nashville Public Radio.
By the way, funny thing, I don't know if you saw this. Vanderbilt's stadium put up a temporary net today in certain parts of the field where the Texas fans are going to be seated, so that they cannot throw bottles onto the field. I think it's a great move by Vanderbilt of trolling the Longhorn fans. I thought that was actually ingenious on their part. So,
well, we did learn, if you throw your bottles on the field, you can get the call changed.
I have never seen anything like that in my life.
Yeah,
that was insane.
Me either.
Okay, so on that note, let's talk about Baptist and the Reformation. So we transition from Vandy in Texas to that.
Yeah, that was a hard transition there.
Yeah, so Jesse, let's think about this for a minute. We're coming up October the 31st. I mean, I never celebrated anything on October 31st growing up, because I was a landmark Baptist, which meant Halloween was a holiday from hell, and we were not Protestants, so we had nothing to celebrate.
Yeah,
on October 31st.
You had nothing. That's true. Protestants, you're like, no, this is this is Reformation Day. Yeah.
It was the night where we cut our porch lights off, which meant do not come to our house and ask for any candy.
We're not participating. We're separating.
We were real separatists. So.
Jordan, if you listen to this, if you could put on this episode on YouTube that picture of Jake as Martin Luther, we would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, so people don't.
You've gotten to celebrate since then.
If people don't know, so when I pastored in Mississippi, we had a Reformation Day celebration, and Amazon sold, and they still sell, a costume, which is like Luther in the monk outfit. So it's the brown tunic and a wooden like cross, and then the wig. So it's so like this is
Like
clear
the friar.
skin
Yeah.
and then the hair. And so I dressed up like that for a Reformation Day celebration, and we had somebody painted like a big sheet of paper, like the Wittenberg door, and we had a mallet. And so I took the mallet as if I were hammering there and took a picture in front of the door and posted that on social media. Well, a buddy of mine created a meme of that, and it's a picture of Luther, a painting of him, and said Martin Luther from Wittenberg, and then it was the picture of me, and it was Martin Luther from Dollar General. So the funny thing though, Jesse, is you could really pull that look off, and you wouldn't have to do the wig, really.
Well, I would have to get some additional hair. I mean, I've got the bald spot covered.
Well, I mean, if you let the sides grow I'm sure you could get it there.
I'm
You could
trying
do
to
that
see.
next year.
I'm trying to see how much one of these Martin Luther costumes is.
I think it's $40 if I remember correctly, because I looked here recently.
You had looked, yeah. You could get one of these T-shirts with Luther on it that says "Nailed It." That's pretty good.
That's weak to me, though. But I mean, so the funny thing, though, is that when we think about, as Baptists, we do have an interesting relationship with thinking about the Reformation.
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, we're very grateful for, Martin Luther, John Calvin, Ulrich Zwingli, William Tyndale, many of these men that were used mightily by the Lord in recovering, the biblical gospel, the preaching of the word. I mean, somebody like William Tyndale getting the Bible into the English language, but also Luther getting the Bible into German, getting the Bible into the language of the common man.
No.
And these great doctrines, justification by faith alone, through grace alone, and Christ alone. And so we're very thankful for that in the sense we are heirs of the Reformation. But then we also understand that Luther and Calvin would have jailed us, most likely. So we have to navigate those waters, and how do we think about ourselves? Of course, there would be some who would contend that we have no connection to the Reformation. And I'm not just talking about, people that would espouse more of a landmark view, but there are definitely some in the Reformed camp who think that we are just the stepchildren of the Anabaptist, and we're to be shunned at all cost. And so we have a very, weird view. And that's for those of us who are Calvinistic Baptists. I don't know exactly what they think about Jesse and his group. I mean, if we're the redheaded stepchildren, I don't know what family.
Well, at least I will say it. I'll give them this. At least they realize that it's not just soteriology that they think you don't follow in ecclesiology.
Yeah, I mean, infant baptism is the only thing that matters. I mean, for some, yeah. I mean,
a big part.
But which is fascinating because their explanation for their theology of infant baptism, that they accuse Baptists of being novel, but I mean, Westminster Federalism is novel. There was nobody, Aquinas was not teaching Westminster Federalism when he explained infant baptism in his life. So I'm not exactly sure how. I'm trying not to be salty, so let's.
Yeah.
The
Reformation was 500 plus years ago. So, but we're still a little upset about some things.
Yeah. Well, I don't forget. So anyway, let's think about this. For example, how should we as Baptists, how should we view the Reformation?
Yeah. I mean, I think some of the things that you said already are spot on. We view it with gratitude, and we see ourselves as heirs of the Protestant Reformation. And in many ways, we see ourselves in continuity with the Reformation. We think about those five solas that we often associate with the teachings of the Reformers. And those are things that we would affirm, right? And things that early Baptists would have affirmed. And certainly when we begin to think about Self-identification. The early Baptist in the 17th century, almost, entirely, would have seen themselves as in continuity with the Protestant Reformation. In fact, some of the confessions go very, very much out of their way to demonstrate that continuity. You can see that in Second London for sure, and you can see that also in an Orthodox Creed, but you can find it in other places. They very much want to be seen as in continuity, but the complexity of the relationship is, like you've stated it, Jake. There's continuity, but there's discontinuity because there's disagreement. The Baptist thought that the Reformation hadn't gone far enough in its application of its principles, so they wanted to continue that application. They wanted to follow the Reformation, but they wanted to continue reforming the church in accordance with the teachings of Scripture. So I think continuity, but continuing the Reformation is maybe gets at that kind of complexity.
Yes, and I like to say that I think that as Baptists, what we did is we took the principles of the Reformation and really said, if this is the soteriology of the Reformation, then this is what that soteriology applied looks like in ecclesiology.
Hmm.
And that, to me, is in many ways the beauty of the Baptist movement, is we are saying, if we believe that God, sovereignly regenerates, that he brings about the new birth, that salvation is not something inherited, that it's not something that is passed down in any way by carnal seed, then it's going to flow from that, then that the members of the church, and it's also where covenant theology plays a huge part in this, is that to be a member of the church and a member in the covenant, the new covenant of grace, Baptist said that's the same thing. So we ask the question, who's in the covenant? If we believe the new covenant is members are those who have been regenerated, who have experienced the new birth, then that cannot include that it's you and then, your children that are born to you.
Yeah.
And so that whole understanding then of this refining of soteriology about what it means, who is a Christian, fits then into, then who is a part of the church?
That's exactly right. So if justification is, by grace alone through faith alone, they take those the soteriological implications of that and apply it to their ecclesiology, and certainly that leads them to see some discontinuity between the old covenant and the new covenant, and the way that God interacted with the old covenant people of God and the new covenant. So they see some discontinuity, and so when they see that discontinuity, it's not as if they have no use for the Old Testament. They don't discard it. That's not what they do. But they do ask, how can we conform the church to the primitive example that we find in the New Testament? How can we make our churches follow the example, the pattern, the type of the New Testament church? And so that insight is really what propels them forward, and I would say what continues the reforming process. But it is, I would say, they see it as a continuation of what they had inherited, but they thought it hadn't gone quite far enough.
Yes, and I think this gets to the heart of how we understand Baptist application of the sola scriptura, and we get into the understanding of the regulative principle. There's no doubt in my mind, Anglicans do not embrace the regulative principle. They would tell you that they don't. That's not a part of their understanding of worship. But Presbyterians and the Congregationalists of that day would have said, yes, we're following the regulative principle. We're seeking to do those things in worship that only that the Bible sanctions, and that alone. And yet, Baptists of that age, it's always interesting when Baptists responded or critiqued paedobaptism. Now, one thing that happened in the 20th century is a lot of Baptist writings on baptism became solely about the word immersion, and that was it. That's about all
Yeah.
that was there.
Yeah.
But that's and I would say that's a fruit of many Baptists in the 20th century embracing more of what I would call a mere biblicism and kind of pushing away some of the more systematic theological doctrinal categories.
Yeah. Yeah.
But before that, at the beginning in the 17th century and the 18th century and the 19th century, and even someone, a person like John Dagg's theology book, his systematic, he doesn't quote anybody. It's the only work of his where he does not cite someone in his work. But it's not, though, just merely only scripture. When he talks about baptism, he brings in the things like the regulative principle, like covenant theology and understanding the covenant of grace. And I think it's very instructive to see that early Baptists, that was one of the things that they pointed out was it is inconsistent to the regulative principle to sprinkle infants and to add that in as part of what Christian baptism is.
Yeah.
And I think sadly that a lot of Baptists today, the regulative principle doesn't, hold any place. And I would argue that from our beginning, an understanding, I get application of the regulative principle can look different based upon churches. But that philosophy and that understanding was very crucial to Baptist identity from the start, because it was very much because they came out of the Puritan separatist tradition.
Yeah. Yeah, the application of the regulative principle, that I think that's a really interesting point. You were saying a moment ago that there became maybe a sort of hyper focusing on baptizo and thinking about immersion, and maybe less of a focus on covenant theology. And there certainly is some of that. I mean, I would say in those earliest decades and even the 17th and 18th centuries, they are discussing things like that. They are discussing the mode of baptism. Absolutely. So that's always been a part of it, but maybe there is less of a focus on covenant theology. And then coming to the regulative principle, that really is a big part of of Baptist theology and our understanding of the nature of the church, of ecclesiology. And it is something that we seem to have lost sight of altogether. And there is very little that regulates our worship. In fact, I would say on the whole, people have forsaken the regulative principle almost entirely. Sure, we might only baptize believers, and we might have a somewhat limited approach to who should partake of the supper and things like that. But everything else becomes, not a total free for all, but is not driven by the regulative principle. And I'm sure there are works out there that consider this, but how do we move so much away from the regulative principle altogether when that really is one of the guiding principles of Baptist ecclesiology in the first, couple of centuries?
So when we think about the Reformation and Protestants, I think it's though instructive that, for all intents and purposes, I think about the quote from John Broadus in 1881 in his work on the duty that Baptists have to teach their distinctives. And he says there, as Baptists, we are Protestants, but in a sense we are not. And what he meant by that is that we do occupy a very unique space because, and I hesitate, and I don't want to be unfair, but I am concerned at times that there are some in broadly speaking Reformed Baptist life that downplay historically how significant it was that Baptists rejected infant sprinkling. That was a huge deal. And you can't minimize that. I don't care what you try to say or find or look. at the end of the day, a consensus of Reformed Protestants in England saw rejecting infant sprinkling as, I mean, unthinkable.
Yeah.
It was subversive.
Well, I think, and that's where the Baptists were right when they said the the whole thing in many ways kind of rests on
Yeah.
this, the perpetuating of an established church kind of relies very heavily on when you have a national established church of baptizing, requiring something like church attendance, and then also baptizing children. I mean, Baptists, when they refuse to have their children baptized, and maybe Greg Wills will forgive me for continuing to call it baptism, but I noticed Jake has been pretty consistent. But when they refused to do that, it was costly to them, right? That they were not submitting to what was required of them of having their children baptized within the parish church. And so you're absolutely right. For all of the continuity that we have, and I would say for all of the love that we have for the example, for even the theology of a Luther, a Calvin, a Zwingli, some of the later reformers in the later 16th century, for all of the things that we love, it is hard to overstate, and I think we often understate the difficulty that it would have been, especially for English Baptists, in dissenting on this issue.
Yeah.
It's huge. It's huge, and it cost them a great deal. So there's always been this kind of complex relationship. Now, to say something semi-controversial here, I think even the Swiss and other Anabaptists experienced this as well, where they dissented from the magisterial reformers or the magisterial Reformation, because I would say that they also saw themselves as following the principles of the Reformation and trying to conform their churches to the New Testament pattern. So people, we can quibble or debate over Baptist origins and, Anabaptist influence or any of that stuff. But the reality is that you find something similar in them where they're also trying to reform to the New Testament pattern, and there isn't much appetite for it in really any of the places that the early Anabaptists find themselves.
Well, we know that Jesse has that soft spot for Munster. And
No, not Munster. Well, I mean, I think if you read Timothy George and others, they see at least some level of.
There were some Orthodox Anabaptists, although the majority.
Well, I mean, I think there's some. I think on the issue of baptism and a believer's church,
Sure. Yeah.
there's some significant continuity there. I mean, obviously, there's tons of discontinuity on soteriology, and unfortunately, in some places on Christology, the relationship between the believer and the government, and all of those sorts of things. But the idea of a believer's church, I mean, you certainly do find that in the Anabaptists. There's no need to downplay that.
Yeah, I think one thing that we can say is that in many ways it is Luther who espouses in the earliest form, I would contend, of a two kingdom theology, of the separation of the two kingdoms, and as in the Protestant movement, and the Anabaptist and then the Baptist are really just seeking to be consistent with that, of what it means to render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting too, circling back to the English Baptist, I saw someone recently, today sent a document, wanted me to look at it and get for thoughts. It's signed by Kiffin and Knowles, and this is in 1651, and talking about showing some Baptist leaders and with the independents, and during Cromwell's time, and trying to show their loyalty. And I've seen a few of these documents, and people are wanting to ask, does this show a sense of magisterial Baptist theology. And I think one thing that we can't lose sight of, as crazy as we may think our country is right now, the period from 1644, well, really 1641, 42, when the English Civil War begins, the first one, to Charles II's restoration, and then 1662, was a very tumultuous period. And there's a lot happening in that time frame among Protestants, and Anglicans, Presbyterians, Congregationalists, the Baptists, both general and particular, and really trying to sort through where they were.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, for example, I think people lose sight that the particular Baptists were trying to wrestle with conditions on the ground to understand where they landed. The First London Baptist Confession is revised 3 times, 44, 46, and 51.
During that period, yeah.
During that period. And some of the significant changes in all 3 of them have to deal with what it says about the civil magistrate, because the form of government in England was changing. Yeah. So I'm not surprised at all to find them moving in a lot of directions. I guess my point is I don't expect them to have a mature political theology. We're not talking about justification by faith alone, which is clearly laid out in Scripture. They're trying to understand. And then it's interesting to think about what's happening here and then what's happening in the colonies, early colonies, with Roger Williams and Obadiah Holmes and John Clark, and they're all corresponding, and Williams and Clark end up over in England for a time. So there's a lot that's taking place here. And look, William Kiffin was a very shrewd statesman. I applaud the ways in which he tried as best as he could to make sure that Baptists had protection and were allowed to meet, whether that was with Cromwell or with Charles II or whoever.
Yeah.
I will add, though, that I think that it's instructive and important to remember. And this is one of the things I took away when I did some reading on Thomas Patient, who was a Baptist that labored for a period of time in Ireland. That the Baptist cause in Ireland, in many ways, depended solely on the protection and support of Cromwell's government.
Yeah.
And once that was gone, the Baptist movement in Ireland evaporated very quickly. Now, I think it's instructive what happens if you're dependent upon the state in ways that are not consistent, I would say, with Baptist principles. And I think the cause in Ireland is, emblematic of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you think about Charles I, and then you think about the interregnum and Oliver Cromwell. Yeah, I mean, there were lots of Baptists who were excited about Oliver Cromwell, and understandably
served in the government, served in the military.
Well, and understandably so. I mean, they thought it would bring them greater religious toleration, religious freedom, and I think that they saw it as an opportunity for greater freedom. So, it's not surprising at all that they saw this as a step in the right direction, away from what they had experienced under the reign of Charles I. So that's not surprising at all. As far as these being tumultuous and maybe somewhat disorienting times, and they're trying to kind of wrap their minds around everything that's happening, I think that's absolutely the case. That's absolutely what is happening. So yeah, I think that's true. To go back to our broader conversation, I think it is helpful for us as Baptists to feel that tension between an admiration for the Protestant Reformation and an admiration for those key reformers, some really well known, some less known, some kind of first generation, some second generation, and even some Paedo-Baptist Puritans in the 17th century, the late 16th century, and to feel a great deal of kinship and admiration and respect for those people, and to love and to learn from their writings. But also there is that kind of tension of, while we love all of these things and we see ourselves as the heir of them, we do also recognize that there is not, I wouldn't call it a departure, but a kind of pressing on with those principles that we inherited that does move us, I would say, further down the line and really more towards conformity to the New Testament pattern than what we find in those figures. But it does put us in a kind of interesting place with a sort of tension where we don't feel exactly at home, maybe, with the Reformation or with the Reformers.
Yes, and I think one thing, maybe this be our last thing to discuss in this topic, is that even though Baptists felt persecution, felt opposition from maybe not so much in some cases the magisterial reformers themselves, but their descendants and so forth. Yet the Baptists had no issues at all mining and reading
Oh, yeah.
and utilizing. And so I think Jesse would be instructive to share some of the work that you've done recently on Thomas Monk and just the different Protestant divines like that he incorporated and used in some of his writings.
Yeah.
Shows you the appreciation that they had.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about even not only the ecclesiological differences, so Baptists have ecclesiological differences with other Paedo-Baptist Protestants of the period, but for General Baptists, there are also some soteriological differences. But what you find in General Baptist of the 17th century, especially several key figures, is they're citing Calvin. They're citing Reformed Orthodox writers, theologians. They're citing John Owen, but they're citing Perkins. They're citing a host of other figures. So clearly they see value and they see themselves with some level of continuity. This isn't something that we're inventing and kind of hoisting upon the past. This is part of their self-identification. And they mine and make use of those authors, those theologians, those resources, even though they disagree and they depart in some really important ways. That doesn't mean that they just write off the past altogether. And that sort of retrieval, really for ongoing renewal, is what the Baptists have done and what we want to see continue even today as well.
All right. Well, we'll close this episode on the Reformation by reminding people to make sure that you get a copy of Baptist Thorough Reformers by John Quincy Adams, not the President of the United States, but a Baptist teacher. C.H. Spurgeon used this book. Spurgeon said he used this in Pastor's College, said it was the best one volume on Baptist principles that he had ever had. The original title was Baptist, the Only Thorough Religious Reformers. So make sure that you pick up a copy. So as we near Reformation Day, we encourage all of our audience to stay Baptist.
Stay Baptist.